Hello, Brad here, just to say we're super proud that the Friday 5pm podcast is sponsored by the Malt Miller, the UK's best home brew store.
We use the Malt Miller for all of our homebrew experiments, as well as tapping them up for advice and binging on their awesome YouTube channel all the time.
That's why whenever we release a homebrew video, we put a recipe kit live on the Malt Miller, so you can brew with the exact same amazing ingredients that we did. The same ingredients used by pro brewers.
So alongside the Malt Miller's nitro-flushed hops, cold-stored yeast and milled-to-order malts, you can pick up recipe kits for our 5 Points Best Bitter, Russian River West Coast IPA, and now the fastest beer in the world, a hazy session IPA that goes from grain to glass in less than 48 hours.
Sign up to their newsletter at tinyurl.com/Malt Miller to get 5% off your first order. With the Malt Miller's amazing customer service and Johnny's 48-hour recipe, you could order the ingredients on a Monday and be drinking the beer by the weekend.
Speaking of which, it's Friday.
It's 5pm.
So enjoy this week's Friday 5pm podcast.
Hello, beer lovers. No, don't like it. Too much enthusiasm. You need to be more deadpan in this game.
Let's try that again. Hello, beer lovers, and welcome to another feature-length episode of The Bubble. I'm here with Rob.
Hello.
Who it turns out is a massive fucking pub nerd.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is my job, is to sell beer to pubs, as most of you know, and I've talked about it plenty, but I suppose my first flurry into working in the brewing world was selling into pubs, the independent free trade. So I'd walk around London, I'd find pubs who were willing to buy beer off me, and I'd sell them beer. So it kind of started there, and I've always worked in pubs growing up. So yeah, I do love pubs, and I love drinking pints. So I stumbled across this guy called the London Pub Explorer on Instagram, who loves pubs way more than me.
Way more than anyone.
Yeah, I mean, this guy really loves the pub. So as soon as I saw him, I was like, getting him on the podcast. I want to hear more. I want to hear why he's so obsessed with pubs. I mean, first of all, and then so much of what he does is about the history of the pub and why it's important. And I'm talking trad pubs. I'm not talking tap walls with no badges. I'm talking red carpets.
We all say we love the pub because we love being in them, we love drinking in them, but he loves the actual building, he loves the history, he loves the social aspect of it. And I think we're all guilty in the craft beer industry of regarding a good pub as a pub that has good beer on, but that's the cherry on top, really. Like, a great pub is beautiful, has great service, and is an asset to the community. And that's a lot of what Ali, the Pub Explorer, really dives into and is really passionate about the idea of the pub being this great leveler in society where everyone can go, everyone can feel welcome. And in particular, the people that don't have places where they can hang out or don't have family or friends close to them, that it's their social life.
Completely. I mean, we need to remember that a pub stands for public house. I mean, that is by definition what a pub is. It is a place for the public to go, a local community to go, and everyone is welcome between the ages of 18 up to 80 plus. And I think that has got lost, particularly in London, and elements of the craft beer community as well is guilty for it. It sort of typecast people, so you need to be of a certain age and a certain demographic, potentially a certain earning to go to it, and really a pub shouldn't be that. It should be for everybody. He touches on it in the podcast, and we'll probably talk about it at the end, but I mean, he actually is a fan of craft beer, but it needs to be for everyone. So yeah, it's a really fascinating chat with a really fascinating guy who is working really hard to save the things that, well, me and Johnny absolutely love, and what I'm sure most of you guys love as well. So we'll hand over to Ali, the Pub Explorer.
Oh, I think it's got a yeast infection. Yeast infection.
I mean, I like to jump around. My missus kind of dictates where we go, which means coaching horses.
Okay.
For me, it's the Birkbeck all day long. I think that's the best.
Which pub?
What?
The Birkbeck?
The Birkbeck, yeah. It's E11. It's by St Patrick's Roman Catholic Cemetery. Oh, you're in for a treat. You know, you were chatting about, you know, pubs staying the same and the pineapple. We'll do this, but it's a time capsule. You walk in and it's not changed probably since the 50s. There's still a bitter on called Rita's, which is named after an old landlady who used to run the castle in Walthamstow, which you might know. And it's just it's wonderful.
In the village?
Yeah, it's on the sort of eastern side, but yeah, it's incredible. The carpet's not been changed in 30 years.
Did not even know that existed.
Wow, it's. I mean, I hate saying the best, but I would say it's my favourite.
So, because when we were speaking originally, I said I had two favourite pubs. So the areas are that there's one east and one west. So the one east is the Palm Tree.
Hey, yeah.
For the same reasons.
Which is the same as the Birkbeck.
The place that time forgot. Like you walk in, red carpets.
I tried to take photos in there once for an article I was working on, and it's not just red carpet. Everything is red.
It comes out red
in that whole place. So taking a photo, like you could play with the white balance as much as you want. You've basically got a scene from The Shining.
I was in once, and Paul, who is the son of the two owners, he's always behind the bar. He was like, "What makes a good pint of Guinness is if you look at it to the light, it's not black, it's red." And it's like, Paul, it's a red light bulb.
You've just been working here for too long. try and go into another pub for the first time in a decade, and you might have a different perspective.
And then my other one, which is in West London, which is one of my accounts, is the Cow in Westbourne Park.
Yeah.
Which
it's under threat, isn't it?
Yeah,
they just did a programme.
So
go crowdfunder or something recently, didn't they?
Westminster Council have tried to revoke have put an abusive licence threat in, so they need to justify it. But that place is amazing. Like, it is a proper locals pub. Like, the two guys behind the bar have worked there for 20 years plus. Like, I don't have an account that has had a member of staff working there for 3 years, let alone 20. You go in, everyone knows the two guys behind the bar. They know their names, they know the order. Like, what Tom has achieved with, like, it is a gastro pub in the sense that the food's nice, but it's not like prim and proper. It's just really nice food
in the right setting, I suppose.
Right setting, and he's worked really hard to keep it like that. And
what was it before? The Railway?
I can't
Railway
remember
Tavern.
the name, but he bought it. He's had it for 25 years. They actually put up a picture the other day of what it was called before.
I'm sure it was the Railway, yeah. I don't have many friends, so I remember this sort of stuff. You know? But,
it was an old IRA pub, I think.
It was, there were a few around there. It was, sort of the tin going around for the cause. And, that happened in Camden in the 90s as well. You saw that quite a lot. I probably first started drinking Camden 96, 97, and you saw that as a pub near the tap in the Admiral called the Stag, which is long closed. And that was like that. Yeah, it was crazy boozer. Just mad people, you know.
That's not the one that's like almost under the arches. It's now
it's near. No, it's not graffitied. It's got a white facade and it's been built up a couple of floors, and it stands alone near the tap in the Admiral. But yeah, it was just crazy. You know, you go in and always fights, always drugs. The toilets were horrific. And then you go in now, I don't know, Lock Tavern, and it's just so clean, it's so sanitised, and it evolves. We'll touch on that, I'm sure. But people kind of say now, I'm going down the pub, but not really. You know, that's your interpretation, and there's no right or wrong. But in my eyes, it's a
different pub.
And that's fine, and it's alive, and that's what I always say: better open than closed. But the experience that people have now is so diluted, which I think mirrors society. You know, everything's watered down. It's very safe. It's expensive. There's no kind of organic feel of having a really great time. It's just manufactured, maybe.
Yeah,
so, welcome everyone to the podcast, and thank you so much for joining us. We'll come back to that conversation because I think that's going to be super vital, particularly from the world that me and Rob come from, because the people that we deal with and the beers that we talk about are often served in what are almost certainly those diluted locations. But before we get into that, it would be really great to know where the Pub Explorer kind of came from. I went back hundreds of posts to find your first post today, and the very first one was about a pub that disappeared.
Very much so. I think the genesis of it, I mean, there's probably a few things going back to sort of loving literature and the mystery of the past. There's a book by Jack London, who listeners will know from White Fang or Call of the Wild, and he did a kind of George Orwell Down and Out in Paris and New York. Or was it? Who did that as well? That was someone else. Someone did. No, that was How the Other Half Lived. But anyway, Down Out in Paris and London. And Jack London in 1901 or 1902 just went tramping around the East End of London. And he came over. Obviously, he was an affluent writer, very middle upper class America. He came over. He had friends in London, and he disguised himself as a tramp. And he just went tramping round the East End, and that was, you know, the start of or the end of the Victorian era, and that just kind of puts something in your mind's eye where you think it's an incredible scenario to see London through those eyes. And I wanted to kind of experience that, get out and see how much of it had changed. There's an element of romance to it, but also I think the main thing as well was, well, I can do that, and it's free. You can get out and explore, and that's kind of what it was. And it was just going out around the East End. I've always had a passion or an interest in it. And for me, the real stories of London, the UK, are not the great and the good. They're not the people that are in palaces. They live very sort of controlled lives. Okay, they're wealthy, their quality of life was great, but I don't know, they didn't have any stories. There was no sort of day-to-day struggles, no hardship, no toasting triumphs or drowning sorrows. And I saw that in the East End of London, and I think that's why I could relate to it. From my dad's side of the family, very, very working class background. 5 of them lived in a one-bedroom room in a rented flat until he was 6, and that's just kind of been ingrained in me, and that kind of culture, and that was a big part of it. And then probably maybe a dozen years ago, there's a bloke called Paul Talling who does Derelict London, and he does walking tours around and books capturing London from, I think, when he probably started doing it late 90s. And he also did a section on closed pubs, and that really struck a chord, because when I started doing urban exploring, going around, which is what that was, I'd see derelict buildings, and I think, again, it comes back to the stories, you know, who were the publicans, who were the punters, what were their lives like? And there's
That's
so
what
many.
You put in that first post, I think. It was like, what were the stories and who's telling them now, I think.
When was that first post?
I think the first post I did, I mean, I've been doing this for a dozen years, but actually documenting it on a media platform was probably 2016, which is 5 years into that. But again, the sort of mystery, the story, the romance, and the unknown story, I think that's what makes it so interesting. And again, with the pub backgrounds, that was always sort of in the family. My granddad was a transport manager for JONNY'S. He used to deliver booze. My dad, when he was a student, part-time, did the drayman stuff. And we always spoke about pubs as kids. And my family, my parents are both Brummies, and we drive up to the West Midlands. And this would be from North London, very young. And we go up the M1. Was it even built then? Yeah, it would have been. But anyway, we go up and we drive through various places, and we play a game called pub cricket. And you go along, and every royal name of a pub was a wicket. So if you had the Crown, that was a wicket. If you had the Three Kings, that was 3 wickets. And then vice versa. If you were batting, everyone with legs was a run. So if you had, I don't know, the Jolly Farmer, and on the picture of the pub sign he was holding up a pig, pig's got 4 legs, bloke's got 2, 6 runs, and so on and so forth. And that's when you think, you know, back in the UK then, there were over 50,000 pubs, probably over 60,000. There was, you know, every village you went through, every town, you would go down a high street, there was pubs. So this game had a lot more longevity, should we say, than in 2021. And that was always ingrained in me, that the kind of culture, the social element of pubs, how important they were, that kind of mystical environment. And the stories of people as well, you know. Pubs open Christmas Day, not always now, but back then they did, and there was a social responsibility for pubs to do that, because, you know, without being too maudlin, but, you know, the suicide rate around Christmas is very, very high, and that's because people are on their own, they're very lonely, and they need somewhere to go, and the public house gives people that arena. And yeah, there might be people that are misfits. I think we've all got our own little quirks, and the pub always caters for people like that. It allows everyone to find a place called home and to fit in. And I think the element of it of being the binding sort of glue of communities has always been very important to me. And to see it disappear in certain parts of London, all over London, it just really struck a chord with me. So I started documenting it, taking pictures. I used to go out with an A to Z. This was before I had an iPhone or a smartphone, and I just take pictures. I've got a hard drive with hundreds and hundreds of pictures of closed pubs. Going back, comparing them is fantastic. Sometimes they're not there anymore. Sometimes they've been gentrified. Sometimes they're housing blocks, and it's just that kind of documentation of a part of London which people often forget about, which is residential London, And I kind of found the platform with Instagram. My website's launching. By the time this goes out, I hope it will be live, and it's just a way of recording what isn't often treasured, which I think is the day-to-day lives of normal people.
It's amazing how people see social media as transitory. They think, oh, well, he's done that for the likes, and then he won't think about it again, or she won't think about it again. But actually, I do a lot of research into history of beer, and I'm looking at books. But in 50, 60 years... they'll be going to your Instagram account and doing the same thing. And it's what I really loved about your feed was that the stories were told there, and the questions were asked as well, which I thought was really interesting. And you got this thing. I don't know whether it's a thing or it's whether I just happen to look at these posts, but you sort of say what to do, and there's just all these comments of other people filling in gaps and filling in blanks and remembering stuff. So it's not like a lot of Instagram accounts, which is, I'm doing this. There's a lot of just going, what do you remember?
It's very clear from what you do, which is why I absolutely loved your account, was Instagram was just a medium for you to do what you do, It's not done for the likes, but you're very thorough in what you do, and it's all documented well. The history. It's brilliant. It's so fascinating for me. I am a complete pub geek. I have looked after pubs around London for the last 8 years. I used to challenge myself to know every one in areas. So when I found your account, I was like, there's someone that knows more than me. This is awesome. I want to meet this guy. But it's a really authentic way of doing it. And as Johnny said, you don't do it for the likes. I don't think. But it's this real authentic way of doing it, and Instagram happens to be, or social media happens to be, the way you publicise that.
Yeah, firstly, thanks very much. I'm glad to see you got that money that I sent you.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely arrived, that one.
We take the podcast sponsorship where we can.
Indeed, yeah. Thank you, and that's why I do it. It's not for self-gratification. Social media is poisonous for various reasons I won't go into, which aren't related to pubs and
there'll be a podcast on that one eventually.
Yeah, indeed. But I just think there's a very harmonious community with beer and pub accounts, and there's a few other people that do what I do, and they're fantastic accounts as well. And if I go on other platforms such as Facebook or Twitter, which is just a mouthpiece for idiots and angry people. It's just people who
don't say that to the beer community,
who love kicking off, and if that's your thing, that's fine. But going on even Beer in the Evenings, you boys remember that? It was an old pub review site, and some of the venom. The posts were dripping in vitriol. It was either governor's mates saying, "Oh, this is the best boozer ever. Yeah, get down there. Bill on the order, whatever." Or it was just, "This place is X, Y, and Z," and it was just very negative. And I think from Instagram, with the kind of a community of pub aficionados, it's a lot more harmonious, which I think is great. And yeah, for me, it's not. Yeah, I do this anyway. I don't want to see likes. I don't want to. It's nice, and you guys invite me down saying, "Do you want to come and chat about it?" is success for me, because it means other people are interested, and I'm sure we'll get onto that. But that means that independent pubs have a better chance of surviving, even if one person reads my post and says, "I want to go there," and does, or messages me and says, "I'm looking for an indie pub on Christmas Day, I want to go and buy beers, where shall I go?" If they go and do that, then that's a hit for me. That's a win, And I don't take payment for posts. I don't know if other people do. That doesn't interest me. But it's just what I think, and other people don't often agree with it, because there's a lot of social commentary of London and how I see it, and it's all about perspective. your age might be 30, and that's going to be very, very different from someone who's 50. Let's say you grew up in Northern Ireland and you've lived in London for 5 years. That's going to be very, very different from someone who's lived there since 1957. And you're never going to have a complete, unity and utopia, nirvana. But I think you do see people coming together with this. But the social commentary is quite divisive, especially when you talk about old London and, say, Cockneys who are born and bred, and then you've got people who have come in from other parts of the UK. There is very much a territorial element to the drinking landscape where we're sitting now, and this is always something that people get funny about, but there is this kind of rose-tinted myth that the East End, there was never any crime, we never locked our doors, it's rubbish. It's absolutely rubbish.
Was that a myth, a common myth? I thought the East End was always like rough and ready.
No, there's two schools of thoughts. Yeah, there's that where the Crays rule with an iron fist, but there's this kind of story where people want to say it's not how it used to be, and that might be if you lived in Northern Ireland or Berkshire or East London, but people peddle a lie about the way things were, and then when things change, because people are not receptive to change, you have kind of a fragmented landscape, and you see that in the types of pubs that you have here, which perhaps we'll get onto. But you've got your kind of, in East London for me anyway, your classic backstreet boozers clinging on, very wet-led, selling carling, which is great, and catering for that demographic. Then we've got your kind of cool kids, your gentrified pubs, which is kind of the product that you would think that people would be listening to this might be drinking. And then you've got your very high-end pubs, Young's and Fuller's, which again come in and gentrify and in some instances make places better because they're on their arse, they're dying, or they absolutely change it. And that comes back to the conversation or the comment about how you divide the landscape, because people who live there a long time see a sharp change. If it's gradual, it's more palatable. But if it happens where you've got, I won't name it, but there's a pub in Mile End. Anyone who knows the area will. Mile End's East End of London, it's E1, and it used to be a really rough and ready, proper boozer, very, very friendly, red carpet, just sort of a nice homely feel. A big pubco took it on, and it's now like your granny's sort of a kitchen where you'd go for doilies and tea and cake, and it's ruined it. It's taken away.
I think I know which pub you're talking about.
I'm sure you do, and I used
100%
to love it. And the thing is, that pubco are very good at doing some changes, but there they went just 100 mile an hour a minute, no consultation with locals, and you go in and it's awful.
Mason jars everywhere.
Yes. Okay. And I just think you ruin this, and you want it to be a pub. You are a pubco with a long, long history. I'm sure people might be starting to place this together, and it's changed it, and it didn't need to do that. And all the people that drank there, with all the social history, all the kind of connections with it, will drink elsewhere.
Yeah.
Well, so let's go back. So you started this journey 10 years ago. There's been, obviously you had life experience before that, of course, but you started this sort of urban adventuring 10 years ago. How much have you seen the degradation of the numbers and also the diversity in British pubs that you've kind of been chronicling? Is it pandemic levels of terror?
It depends where you live. If you live in Waltham Forest or Hackney, which are both north or northeast London boroughs, you are seeing a resurgence. I had a really good conversation with a young man who's from Blackheath, South London. He's doing a dissertation at Leeds Uni, and his project was on the pub revival in Hackney, which was great. And I gave him a bit of flavour and some information. But his thesis and analysis and conclusion was positive. And that only changed as, again, coming back to a diverse drinking landscape of gentrification, and it's often a very derided part of UK society of culture, but it's unavoidable. The people involved in those agents, it's beyond their control, and areas change. And in a lot of areas, the only way a pub will survive is if it's gentrified. But to what degree that happens is subjective in terms of if you like it or not. But in other boroughs in the East End, we're nearing a scenario where there will be no pubs in that particular postcode. And I won't perhaps go into it in too much depth here now, but there's core 10 reasons. Well, unfortunately, there's 11 now with COVID, why pubs have closed since the Second World War. The first one, the first antagonist was the Luftwaffe, it was the Blitz, and that changed London on a massive scale because people lived in a very tight-knit community in Victorian or Georgian terraces or in Peabody or Guinness Trust houses. Suddenly you had slum clearance, you had blitz clearance, people were put in prefabs, and after that, from the 50s onwards, they were either thrown into high-rise towers where the relationship with the pub was a lot more distant, or they took houses and promises of a better life in the new towns, so Harlow and Beaconsfield, even Dagenham, which obviously now is a London borough, but it wasn't until 1963, 1965, and that changed and dispersed the sort of Cockney, the inner London customers, and then you had new arrivals come in, and that was kind of the sort of catalyst for change. And you've had various reasons. We touched on it on our pre-chat. Beer duty. You've had scenarios where people are more healthy. I mean, millennials drink certainly less, but even going back before that, the 70s, more people got healthy. They started jogging. They quit smoking. There's so many factors, you know, it's a change of industry about why pubs have closed. But in 2021, I see a brighter future. And I saw one until COVID came along, and now I'm worried because I think operators will be sort of nervous about dipping their toe, especially first-time operators.
What was making you feel a bit more positive? Was it you were seeing responsible gentrification, or
responsible gentrification? I mean, so that's
was
a
like
great
a
word.
beer name.
Yeah, maybe we'll start knocking it up now. I mean, that's a bit of an oxymoron. I think I just saw people with fire in their belly. I think, you know, I go around a lot and I get invited in, which is the biggest pleasure, and people will, you know, get in contact and say, I've bought this pub and I'm doing this with it, what do you reckon? And it's obviously a bit of publicity, but also the documentation, posterity, saving it, and I'll go in, and I've just met various people who are just excited, or as excited as me, and they've got real fire in their belly, and they want to deliver something for the community, and I'll mention it. There's a pub in Globetown, Roman Road, which is East London near Bethnal Green, and a lady came in and took it on board. Her name's Mel, and this was a real problem pub. It's a state pub. It's bombed in the war.
Is that beside the little estate? There's like a Greg's and a flower shop, and it's the one to the right. Used to have a...
No, there's not a Greg's. Or maybe there is. There's a couple of butchers. There's a Freshco.
Yeah. I think I know
okay,
which
it's
one you
coming
mean.
towards the River Lee. Anyway, but yeah, that was a problem pub, and before it closed in 2016, 2017, their licence was changed, and they had to close at 7 o'clock every night. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about what kind of pub it was. And she went and, you know, applied to Tower Hamlets, the local authority, for a licence, and she said, they said, you won't get one. The police will never give you a licence for this pub. Various discussion, negotiations. She's got to have door staff Thursday, Friday, Saturday, but that's opened. It was going really well. It was a success. COVID very, you know, sadly struck, but that kind of determination and that excitement, I think, was great. And it's people value it. They want to see a pub. They want to be a part of it. Transient nature of it, that comfort, you know, that warmly feel that is so important to so many people. And I think, you know, London is the city in the UK with the most people who live on their own. And I'll touch on it later in terms of Starbucks and what you don't get from an experience like that, which you do experience in a public house. And if you go into a Starbucks and you start talking to someone at the next table, they'll think you've just got out of a mental asylum. Whereas in a pub, if you chat to someone at the bar or make a comment about the football on the telly, it's an open forum, and it's just very strange the way society is now.
Yeah, do you think what we interpret as a pub has maybe changed? Because everything you're saying I completely agree with, and I mean, if you walk around, especially East London, and I mean, I love doing it, and I've told my friends to do it. Like, if you look up or look down, so if you look at green tiles, look at the old tiles on top, look at the cellar hatches on the ground, you realise just how many pubs there's still the remnants of. They were everywhere, but were they a different thing? Like, people went to them all the time. There was a pub literally on every corner. You went there to see your mates. You went there to get away from it all. I don't know. I think people use a pub maybe in a similar way, but it's a lot more diluted. Like, I don't think people realise how dependent certain areas, certainly of London and really across the world or the UK, especially with a lot of industry, how much they depended on their corner boozer. And we travel around a lot more and we want to experience different pubs, but really back then you went to the same place day in, day out. And has the pub ethos changed maybe a little bit?
Yeah, I think very much so. And you've got to remember then, as I alluded to before, communities were a lot tightly knitted, and there was very much a cradle-to-grave existence where you would go to school and live within people of 10 streets of you. When you left school, you would do national service with those people. When you finished there, you'd be on the factory floor with them, and then you'd be drinking in the pubs with them. You'd be at the same dance halls with them, and that was your world. It was probably 2 or 3 square miles, and that's the way your life was. And you've got to remember as well, and another contributing factor to why pubs closed is because going sort of into the distant past, they had very, very little competition. All you had was music halls, dance halls, association football, speedway if you go in sort of 60s, 70s, which long died out, and the cinema, and that was it. Pubs had no rival. And again, because you had so many people living in such dense places, they were also, the breweries, huge employers. And if you think about Charrington's, which had the Anchor Brewery on Mile End Road, you had Truman's Brick Lane, which I'm sure all your listeners will know, and then you also had the Man's Man Paulin on Whitechapel Road. They were tap rooms, pretty much brewery taps for all of the big brewers, which were in a very dense radius, and a lot of people would have worked for those, and your whole life was kind of centred around the local area, and the cornerstone of it was the pub, because there was very little else to do, and you couldn't afford foreign holidays. You know, it was difficult. Times were tough. I'm kind of painting a sort of a Charlie Chaplin violin, austerity story here. I don't know, but it was very, very different. And it wasn't until the 70s, or maybe probably the 60s, that you saw different entertainment avenues, different outlets. And people might laugh of a certain age, but Tenpin Bowling, when it first came in, was kind of an upgrade from existing British games, and that changed the landscape. And you had kind of London Five, Shove Halfpenny. That was the main core, and they kind of started dying out. And I'd love to know, you boys, London Five's darts?
No.
So, never heard of it. That's what I mean. And that was a huge part of culture. It's a different board with obviously 5 instead of the traditional boards, but that's almost gone. People don't even know that exists. And as recently as 30 years ago, that was a huge part of people's lives. And I think there's only one league now in Limehouse and Stepney that still play, with pubs in Plaistow. It's unbelievable. But I think, the competition has been a threat to the pub, and also we live more transient lives. I mean, you're from Northern Ireland. I don't know where you're from, Johnny.
Oxford.
Oxford, right, okay, there we go. And I'm sure you've got family who are scattered all over the globe or the country, whereas before people lived in very sort of tightly knit communities, and people didn't move around so much, and you had that kind of population displacement, and it is going to fracture the
now we've got Instagram, we don't need to go anywhere.
I know, we don't go anywhere now. It's COVID, isn't it?
It's also something that occurred to me while you were talking, was the idea that everyone lived, worked, and sort of played within 2 to 3 square mile radius. Yeah. You don't even need to go back to like my family in Oxford. Like, most of my friends live in other parts of London, so the idea of us meeting in the same pub or the same 2 pubs is completely alien. So every pub has to cater to every part of London to
absolutely
to some extent.
And you don't all work together.
Yeah.
For example, Dagenham with Ford, that would be the main employer up until the late 90s, early noughties. But a lot of people would have worked there. They would have played in works football teams. They would have drunk in their local pub every Thursday, Friday, played darts. It just kind of cultivated a family environment, because you live such dense lives. But now if you want to have a beer with someone in London, it's an hour to Shepherd's Bush or wherever you want to meet. But
so in some ways, with everyone living disparate lives, you'd have thought that would have meant that the pub played a greater role, because it would have been somewhere that you could come together. But it hasn't quite played out that way. Obviously, there's competition for coffee houses, cinemas, all this kind of stuff, and also what is essentially a new temperance movement that's kind of happening at the moment. But why has the pub kind of struggled to continue to be the meeting place?
I don't think it's necessarily the pub's fault itself. I think it's the environment, and also sheer economics. I mean, I often get lambasted for this, but especially in working class areas, the smoking ban in 2007 did have a big impact. Those people didn't stop going to pubs, but they went less. And you chuck in supermarket price wars, it makes it a lot easier for people to sit at home where they can smoke if they're a smoker. and also, drink cheaper booze. And if you think in working class areas, I think it was a Guardian study in 2016 said that people from certain low financial demographic were 5 times more likely to smoke. So if you're talking about inner residential London, a lot of those wet-led pubs, which were on borrowed time anyway, were really gonna struggle. That was a huge thing. And if you think off sales almost died out from the 60s onwards when supermarkets started selling takeaway beers, and again, you had pubs that were tap rooms before, yet those breweries closed. That increased costs. There's so many financial elements. I mean, the beer duty's absolutely criminal. I'm sure you've had people on who are better qualified than me to talk about the impact of that on pubs, especially independents. But I think the pub, again, I get kind of derided for this, but the UK is very much following American trends now in terms of the way we behave and consume. And if you think the analogy that you said, Rob, in terms of, there was a pub on every corner, we're kind of accelerating to there's a Starbucks or a Costa on every corner. And that's not just in residential London. We're in Hackney Wick, trendy Hackney Wick, 30 years ago, artist communes and whatnot. We've just got a Sainsbury's, and that's very divisive. Some people love it, but then people romancing the past and don't want that. They want to cling on to this kind of independent world that they think they're living in. And as I said before we started speaking, if you don't want to be part of that and to avoid major corporations, you almost have to not leave your house.
You've got to go full good life.
You've got to be exactly that, and it's just not possible in a technological world. And
when did the off trade maybe become so prevalent and start killing the pub? Like, when did people start drinking at home more? Because when there was a pub in every corner in London, like, I don't think.
I believe it was actually, I'm pretty sure because I've looked at the statistics, I think it was 2016 when that literal shift happened from majority of beer sold being on trade to being
but
off
not
trade.
even
it
the
was.
shift.
I read that yesterday, actually, funnily enough.
Not even the shift of that, but when did it start becoming more prevalent of like people drinking at home? Because sort of the times that you talked about and the times when there was pubs everywhere and people literally used them to socialise, to meet, to get out of the house, to do everything, when do they shift to then start maybe just drinking at home? Do you know?
I think there's probably an element, to go back a step further, pubs became saturated. There were too many, and that's why so many closed, because you had a proportion of the population who don't drink, whether that's for religious reasons or for health benefits, especially millennials. I know so many that have never touched alcohol. They're 30 years old. There is that kind of behaviour change which is happening. And I just, it's really hard to sort of put your finger on it and say it was this or it was that. But it's been slowly building for a long time, I think. And I just worry. You boys obviously like a drink, and your listeners do, which is great, and that warms the heart. But long term, we are drinking less, which means pubs will not have the footprint that they had before.
It's
It's
crazy,
not a requirement.
like the stats that you said about millennials who don't drink, and to me it just sort of baffles the mind, because that is like when you're a kid, like a teenager, that's kind of what you strive to do in a sort of weird way, that you live for, like the search of like getting your beers with your mates when you're underage and you'd meet a girl or whatever. Like,
are we going to get served?
Like the fake IDs, everything, the lengths you would go to. And I'll hear about my cousins' kids who are just like, none of them drink. Like, what?
Well, the local liver specialist will probably be happy about that. But apparently, I was reading that Jurgen Klopp at the Liverpool Christmas party pre-COVID was almost having to bully everyone just to have a shandy. Nobody other than your James Milners and the older. No, he doesn't drink. He's teetotal, but the older kind of squad members probably had a couple of baby shams. But
he comes from Germany, where that is a trend, that is happening, but it's a way slower process than it is in the UK.
I love that stuff. Been drinking it for years. Drinking it for years. Drinking it for years. Drinking it for years. I heard they recently decided to add more hops to it. I heard they recently decided to add more hops to it.
I've got then a big question for you about your opinion on craft beer.
I was waiting for that.
Because
my car's on fire. So
Yeah.
excuse me. I gotta go.
I 100% agree with everything you're saying, but craft beer is playing a part in something. It's becoming more and more common, and I mean, I remember when I first moved to London, and the Dean Swift was the first pub I worked in when I moved in, or moved to London. And
I'm guessing that's not the Dean Smith in Shadwell.
No,
on the
it's
South
the
Bank.
one in
On the Shad Thames.
in Shad Thames.
Okay, yeah.
And I remember I was not like into craft beer. I was sort of interested in what I could get in Northern Ireland, which was not very much. And there was a pint on the bar, which was Colonel IPA, and I think it was £7 at the time. This is like 10 years ago, and I was just like,
That's a week's pay.
If you catch me ever buying a pint of £7 beer, like, you can shoot me type of thing. And then like 3 weeks later,
You were on a
4
drip.
pints of Colonel, please. Loving it. And like, I was, a complete convert to it all. Like, I loved the independent nature of it all, like the little brands that were brewing railway arches.
Yeah.
I love the flavour. Like, I was used to really just drinking a lot of Guinness. Like,
Funny that, yeah.
just the cliche. But the bars in Northern Ireland were really boring. It was Harp, it was Carlsberg, it was continental bad lager brewed in Burton-on-Trent. That was about the most exotic you get, and then or Guinness, and that's all we drank. And then I moved over, and there was the craft revolution, so to speak. But I do empathise with the negatives in it. Like, it makes a pub far less of a public house when a beer costs £7-8 a pint.
Yeah, I think you're reacting to market forces, and I always say with gentrified pubs, nothing pleases me better if you go in and you see that on the rig, but then you got £3.50 carling for all the old faces who've kept that pub going for forever. What often happens is, and you change the name of a pub, you put £1.50 on the drinks, and ultimately that is marginalising certain customers because some of those pubs don't want them.
Yeah, like I've got customers that will take on pubs, and they literally say that to me. Oh, we'll put £1 on them because we'll get the
Get
old
rid of
people
the locals.
out. And,
They'll go down the spoons, and we've kind of got that utopia we
breaks
want.
my heart a little bit because I do believe that like a pub is a public house. It is for everyone, and we talked before about how my favourite pub in London is the Palm Tree, which is just ages 18 to 80. It doesn't matter what you do, what you earn, anything. Anyone is welcome in there to go and drink a pint.
That's what it used to be like everywhere. I mean, I first probably started going to pubs properly or with frequency 95 maybe, and every pub was like that. And I'm not romanticising it, but every pub had mushroom stalls. It had red carpet. A lot of them had blackout drapes from the Blitz. It really was, a lot of them hadn't been touched. They were underinvested. And what you've seen with craft beer is people are investing. As I said before, people with fire in their belly, and people will take somewhere over, and they know the only way they're going to get the young, and I hate this word, I find it really pejorative, hipster, is to get them in, just using it for context, is to have these beers in, and that's how pubs survive, and that's what I'm about. I want to see pubs survive, and it's hard for me sometimes to go into a gastro pub, and I'm sort of biting my hands, but I'm still pleased. Maybe it's not for me, but other people like it. It's subjective. And as long as it lives, that's the main thing.
It's a really interesting thing that I've bumped up against. So as somebody who through the craft beer channel, through the bubble, and through my general work is fiercely like independent, small business. And the implication of being independent and small business is higher costs, right? So within craft beer, there is a massive movement, and everybody listening to this will be thinking this in their heads. They'll be like, we need to make sure that everything on tap is independent and ethical. But there is the dark side of that, which is that by being independent and ethical, you price out most drinkers in the UK. So it's a really delicate balancing act that you have to find, where you have to go, well, we could put a cheap pint of Foster's on there for the people that have been drinking here for years, but then equally, then we're supporting a business that doesn't look after its people and its workers correctly. So it feels like this whole premiumization.
Is that what you're trying to say?
That's been going on in pubs is leaving people behind, but it's also coming from a place where we're trying to improve. And I don't know what the answer to that is, because craft beer can't. Putting £1 on a pint is outrageous because you want to filter people out.
Yeah.
But when that pint is literally what you spend on hops, malt, distribution, cold storage, whatever it is, there's not really an answer there.
And you're there to make money,
exactly
which is the main thing.
Well.
You've got a roof over your head and you've got bills to pay. But I think just in terms of taking economics out of it as a consumer, you just want to go in somewhere and think, right, I like that. It's got, whether you like them or not, sofas, craft beer, Foster's for £3.80, pool table. Doesn't matter. You just want to go in and be treated like a customer, and you'll go somewhere that tailors to your needs, to
it's
your
about
market.
accessibility at the end of the day. Like, a pub is a public house, and the members of the public, be it rich or poor, whatever ethnicity, whatever anything else you want to throw in there, should be welcome and should feel welcome. So
And have something for them. Even if it's, so many places in London now, you'll go in, especially if you're not in West London, which is Young's country, and say, I'll have a pint of light and bitter. And the amount of people that will look at you behind the bar who don't know what that is. And that's such a London-centric drink, or was. And behaviours change, and pubs need to react to that. But yeah, I'm all about inclusivity. For me, it's massive, and without that, pubs lose what's so important to them and the community. If you go in and don't feel welcome, a pub has failed. Whether that's a craft beer place or a real hellhole in the back street with 3 blokes with no teeth, doesn't matter. It's somewhere that you feel that you can go in and not be bothered. And International Women's Day, I did a post on that, and it kind of spoke about how it's not something that I've seen massively, but I've seen incredibly inappropriate, disgusting harassment of women in pubs, late 90s. That doesn't happen now in most places. There's certain places women would avoid. I'm not saying that's right, but they just would. But in most pubs, especially on the high street, pubs have tailored to cater for women, to make it more inclusive, and that's the way it should be. Not just because of your taste in drinks, but just to feel comfortable and relaxed. And again, I mentioned before, if a pub's not doing that, it's failed.
Yeah.
So it sounds like one of the solutions is to ensure diversity within the pub industry. So we're sat in a place where, I think it's quite good. It's like $4.80 for a pint of Paulana, which in London, everybody outside London just went, what the fuck? But within London, that's quite reasonable. But it's important that down the road, there's somewhere where there's going to be an entirely different offering. And it feels like one of the major issues, it's not just pubs closing, it's a certain type of pub closing. It's wet-led. It's usually a community pub, so it's the only pub that's there. And so while we see pub numbers are actually quite steady at the moment, it's chains like Wetherspoons and it's craft beer pubs that are growing. And the actual community pubs, the ones that were relied upon, are the ones disappearing. Is that your experience, and is there something that can be done?
I think very much so, and unfortunately, I don't want to get too political, but this government has let down a lot of people with their policy and the way they've reacted to COVID, because they haven't understood the true value of the public house to the local community. And you mentioned that wet-led pub. If that closes, which a lot will, it might take 2 or 3 year fallout, but the people that drink there, a lot of them are lone dwellers. They live in a flat. A lot of them will be social housing, and if they don't have that social arena, they are very much on their own. And if, as you said, they're widowed and their kids live away, or they don't have kids, they don't have any sort of check-in. There's no sort of social service, and if they're not linked up with Age UK or any other bodies, with cuts as well to community centres and places like the Derby and Joan. I'll explain what that is to people who perhaps don't know, but it was kind of, and this is probably an un-PC term, but the dancing dollies, and they would go and they'd have a spin around the dance floor to vintage music, tea and cake, and there's a couple still going, certainly in South London, I think Peckham, Walworth, round the Elephant and Castle, but those will eventually die out, and you're going to have a scenario again in a city where you have several million people living on their own, where they have no outlet, and that's going to have a big impact on mental health and sort of people's desire to get out. Because once you get into a rut, once you get into a behaviour, it's very hard to get out of it. And if those people can't afford craft beer prices or craft beer pub prices, they're very isolated. And I think the solution is, I mentioned it before, and again it comes down to economics, but it's having a tap in every pub. This might be a bit fantasy for me, but just on the rig, where it is a pint of Beck's or Foster's or Carling, and it is £3.80, where people can't afford it, because we kind of advanced into a scenario where you're either going to have Wetherspoons in certain places for people of a certain budget, or you're going to have really high-end eateries and gastropubs or craft beer. There won't be a middle ground, and I think it's really important to impress that things do change, and hopefully everyone who's listening, there becomes a point where you are the oldest person in the pub. Hopefully you've lived a long lifetime, and you sit there and you say, well, when I was a lad, etc., etc. But at least you can do that, and you have to be receptive to change. But it needs to be done slowly and gradually so that people can catch up with it. If you do things too starkly or too quickly, you leave people behind.
Yeah, I mean, it leads to polarisation. I think that's what's really happening in the pub industry. We do end up with, and when I criticise Wetherspoons, as I do frequently, people say there's a place for that. People need that. And you're like, yeah, but I wish they didn't. I wish they were more independent, or even brewery-owned pubs that were able to offer that. Instead, we have to go to Wetherspoons, which is owned by a guy who couldn't give two shits about the people who he's working for or who he's serving. And so this polarisation is really creating an issue. And like I say, pub numbers are doing okay. Pub diversity is really strong.
Oh, it's dreadful. Yeah, if you go into any wet-led boozer, and I'm sure again we'll touch on this with solutions to long-term recovery from COVID, is I think people need to be a lot more understanding and inclusive. And I didn't want to do it, but kids in pubs is very divisive in East London, and certain older customers won't go to certain public houses because of a perceived element of what they see as a playgroup, as a creche. And not all parents are bad, it's just a certain percentage that let it down. And the worst thing you'll see is where kids are disturbing people, and you're not held to the kind of same accountable standards. If that was 10 lads screaming and shouting, they'd be asked to leave. But kids running around knocking over drinks, or I've seen accidents where people have had drinks on them and hot coffee, and the parents kick off, and there needs to be that kind of respect, I think, is the right word in pubs. And there's certain wet-led pubs which other people won't, hipsters, new people, whatever you want to call them, won't go into because they're scared of the indigenous population. There's kind of a mistrust with certain drinking groups because they, in turn, not all, but some, don't like hipsters. They don't like new arrivals. They're trendies with beards, drinking £5 craft beer, £5, £8 craft beer. And there's a lot of, and you see it as well in London with cycling and cycle lanes and people wanting to use their cars. And if you speak to someone who's a millennial versus a boomer and on their view of London's road makeup, you'll get absolutely crazy polar opposites on their opinions. And I think pubs are the same. And I think a big element of the survival and how we need to progress is going to be co-ops, which I think we'll talk about in due course. That's massive. But also people actually just talking to people in pubs. That's what used to be a big thing. You go into a pub, even as a stranger, greet people at the bar. That doesn't happen now. I mean, I know we haven't sat at a bar in what feels like about 15 years, but it's that kind of tradition of meeting new friends has died out. There's a pub I go to a lot in Poplar called the Greenwich Pensioner. It's not in Greenwich. And the governor's sister works there, and she says in trendy West London or sort of Hackney pubs, people go there to meet friends. They don't go there to make them. And that's what pubs used to be like. I even remember that. You'd stand at the bar and just chat to people. And I hope that returns. Hopefully COVID does, because people have been so isolated for so long, they might go out on their own. I've got mates who are sort of 30 who do go out and just have a beer at the bar, and it's important. And you can learn so much from people just by having a chat.
It's going to be such a struggle. Like, I think a lot of people are trying to say that, it hasn't been the end times that we thought it would be for the pub. But the closures aren't going to happen now. They're going to happen once the pubcos and the landlords start to rack up the rents back to where they were, and the people aren't coming back, and the funding stops for the furloughs. And also the fact that, we have to be honest here, pubs, I don't think are going to go back to the same turnovers that they had for a long time. But all of their rents, which were agreed in advance, are going to be right back to where they were. And that's where the huge issue is going to be, which I think leads me on to sort of the real question I wanted to get to with this podcast is what can we as punters do to help? Beyond going to our local pub, what can we do? How can we be activists in saying we love the British pub, whichever form of British pub we love? How can we help?
To go back a step, that happened between 95 and 2000 in London. I won't name them, but a very, very big pubco just asset stripped because they realised they can make a lot more money by selling a pub an old husk for, say, whatever it was, pretty close to $1 million even back then, and that's a lot more than you're going to make on a lease of 20-25 grand a year. It's simple economics, and I think that sadly will happen again after COVID. And like I said, the fallout will be a couple of years because you're already tied into whatever commercial agreement you've got. What more can we do? I just like to think that we'll see more co-ops. I think that's really going to happen on the back of pubcos just getting rid of failing businesses.
So just to explain a co-op, that's where a pubco decides to sell a pub and probably to get it redeveloped, and you can step in using legislation that the community asset of community value.
Yeah, I mean, it was back in 2011, Localism Act, and it gave people, the community, the chance to buy the pub. So a 5-year preservation order slapped on it, and it gives the community 6 months to raise the money to buy it or possibly even lease it. And I think that's going to have to happen. There's one near me in Leighton in East London called the Antelope, and the developer made loads of HMOs, wasn't allowed to complain to the planning inspectorate. It got overturned. It's now got to be reverted back, and the community will attempt to buy that. But everyone knows London real estate prices are absolutely ridiculous. If you were living in Knightsbridge, you'd probably just get Hugo and Tarquin to do a whip round, and it would be done, with 5 people. But if you want to raise between 1.2 and 1.6 million quid in East London, which is still working class and it's still not people on very, very high salaries, that's difficult. But I think the Plunkett Foundation are very good about helping people. That's something that helps. I think there's an organisation legislation that it helps people to buy pubs, to bring it back into the community. And
there's some good examples of it in London, even from recent years, of the community buying it. I think the Chesham Arms, which is near here, they did that, which is one of my favourite pubs. It's a beautiful pub. Big customer of ours and someone we're very friendly with, and they even captured the community of a pub so well. Like
2 fires as well. I mean, that always
two
goes
open
down
fires,
well.
They get good pizza, but everyone goes in there, and that's what they have done. And it feels like a community pub. It is a community pub, but it feels like it too.
And they've done it slowly within their means. It took a couple of years for the garden to be done. I think that was only done 2 years ago, and they've just done it small steps, and it's a wonderful inclusive pub. It's great. It's the modern Hackney, which I love. Hackney's often derided for being too trendy. Gentrification has priced out the old residents. It's true, but it's adapted well in certain places. But there's another co-op in Poplar called the Tommy Flowers. There's the Antwerp in Tottenham, great pub. There's the Ivy House down in Nunhead, and you're going to see that a lot more.
That pub is amazing. I remember the first time I went into it with our South London account manager at the time, and I was like, we need to sell them beer. I said, why? It's like, look at it. It is incredible. It's got like an old dance hall type thing out the back.
Out the back.
There's a lot of wood. There is a lot of
old
mahogany.
Trumans. I mean, it's interwar. They had an architect called Arthur Sewell, and he sort of changed the face of London pubs because they were very murky, male-orientated, almost hovel-like sort of subterranean drinking dens. And in the interwar year, they wanted to make them more inclusive, trying to bring in more women into the pubs, and it was called the Improved Pub. And they just put more wood in, brought food in, different lighting, music, and the Ivy House is a classic example of that. And I think that needs to happen more. I think it's very obvious, but go to the pub more, because I think behaviour change has dictated a lot of closures with health. Because what used to happen, people would go home from the pub every night and stop in for 2 or 3 drinks, go home with a dinner and go to bed. That doesn't happen now. People will go to the gym, or they'll go for a coffee, and
or they'll work late.
Or they'll work late.
Another London phenomenon.
So one thing, I mean, we've been brainstorming and trying to come up with the positives that will happen in a post-COVID world, and one thing I maybe think is that if people are working from home more often, that it comes 5 o'clock, they've not left their house because they've been sat there all day. Pubs might start to get busy again, particularly early week. If I talk to any pub owner, they're always quiet, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and they're racking their brains trying to get people in the door. But maybe if you're working from home those days, like it's Tuesday, you've not left your house, that is your option, and it might start to bring that community back to the pub.
I think so, but I think it's also not just on the consumer. It's not on the punter. I think pubs need to box a lot more clever. And what I'd like to see a lot more places do in residential areas, which don't now, because traditionally they open at 4 or 5 o'clock because there's no footfall, is open at midday and do £10 working from home. You'll have a coffee, a sandwich with chips and your Wi-Fi for £10. People aren't going to do that every day, but if people do that once, twice, 3 times a month, there's another revenue stream for people to buy in. And then what happens then? They get their spouses, their husbands, their wives, come and meet us at 5:30. Let's have a couple of drinks. Yep. Oh, you got a band? We're doing the quiz.
I dare
League's
someone
on.
to work at a pub from 9 to 5 and then leave without buying a pint.
Yeah, I mean, starting at 9 is dangerous unless you're in a Wetherspoons. But I mean, midday is certainly a cleverer time. But the pubs need to be more creative. I think that's something that really needs to be impressed on operators. Is people are only going to come if they're getting value for money. And yeah, there's an element of goodwill to support something, but you need to take something away from it and think, I want to do this again.
Yeah.
Talking of stuff that isn't only on the punter as well, something that was, I can't remember who I was talking to, but we started talking about this. So my personal view, and it is also a political view, is that the beer tie has been a horrific stranglehold on the ability of pubs to deal with changes in the market. One of the things that I feel like pubs could really do post-COVID, brewers could really do, is to try to reset that. So if there are going to be offloads from the major pubcos, there are breweries out there that have done extremely well through selling packaged beer that could invest in these pubs and turn them into their own estates and try to do it in a different way that those pubcos did. Do you see a future for that, like 5 Points did with the Pembury?
Yeah, and I think a certain brewers, I think Green King have been very, very good in terms of with their leased houses, just dropping the prices, slashing prices, thinking we know it's difficult, times are very hard, we don't want this pub to close, it is profitable for us, we need to bring something else to the table. I mean, most people want to see Tide go, but then what happens? The lease price goes up. I mean, I'm not an expert in the commercials of running a public house, but there's ways big business will always squeeze you for more money in another way if legislation changes. But yeah, I think I'd like to see that happen, certainly. And I think it's difficult because the customer, again, doesn't care. They just want to go into a pub. You've got the beer I like, you've got a pool table, that's great. But behind the scenes, we're becoming more aware because of blokes like you chatting about it, Instagram, social media, and you vote with ethically what you think is the right pub to go to. I do. That's why I always go to independents. You know, I love big pubcos. There's some I've got so much time for. Their staff training is fantastic. Staff retention is a lot better. The training scheme's great. But if you gave me an independent on the corner where I can just go and kind of morph into a chair that's not been changed since the war, and you know there's a piano in the corner, that's me. And if they've got a craft beer I like, even better. But
it's difficult though, because especially, I mean, it's changing a little bit, but like Enterprise Inns were the biggest pubco in the country, and the way they operated, like you wouldn't even know Enterprise Inns existed. Like they kind of
got loads of subsidiaries, don't they?
Well, they don't manage the houses.
Yeah.
They lease the building, and I mean, there's all sorts of weird old school things
it's
they did.
Stonegate now, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but so they tax you on the wet essentially. So publicans were on their knees financially because they couldn't make any money on the beer they were selling, but they managed it, the sort of the outlook. So you could be although all the beer was fairly generic, you could be like a gastropub, or you could be a boozer, you could be whatever it was. There was no decor to influence, or you weren't told what to sell. So you'd go into those pubs and you wouldn't know it was a Tide house.
Yeah.
Which always really frustrated me, both from a professional perspective of like walking into them and trying to talk to them about selling them beer, but also I felt from a personal level like if I walk in and I wanted to say drink in an independent pub, you'd have no idea it was tied to this.
Yeah.
Well, the biggest pubco in the country at the time before they sold.
I mean, some people are comfortable with that. They don't mind. But I think, as I said, people are becoming more aware, and it's the same with Shop Local, which COVID has kind of driven. That's accelerated, not because people have to, but that person's on their own. It's their business and it's organic and they source locally. I'm all over that, which is great.
Yeah. Time are we on?
So we were 45 when we finished, so we're at an hour. Was there anything you wanted to raise that we haven't? Do you want to plug the website again at the end? Or?
Yeah.
I can lead you onto that. Is there? And then I'm trying to think. I feel we could talk for hours, but
we've actually covered all of my questions. So if you don't have any, then we can do a plug for the website and obviously the Instagram account.
So we know how we're going to save the pub. You've ticked that off. You've done that. But what is next for the London Pub Explorer?
Website's launching this Saturday, which is the 28th of March, I believe, and it's something that I wanted to do for a long time, but I had to park it because of COVID, and we're doing a few things as of August so that we've got a little bit of a leeway with the 21st of June, because I'm sure there'll be some bumps in the road.
There've been some broken promises
yeah,
before. Yeah,
indeed. We'll have to see how that plays out. But I'm doing East London walking tours from the 21st of August. There's 15 different locations, and the genesis of it was, as I said, urban exploring and understanding and the history, the culture, the social history of somewhere. And we'll go around on these tours. There's 4 public houses. These are proper boozers. You'll go into them. It's the governor behind the bar in some cases. He or she have been there for 40 years. They'll give you a bit of backstory. We'll talk about any events in the area that have happened, the social history, the characters, the personality. And it's just a flavour for people to come to an area that possibly they've never heard of, that's a long way from where they live, because with London, we're very insular. You have your office, you have your local where you drink, perhaps after work, or play five-a-side football, but people don't explore what is a wonderful city with so much diversity in areas and public houses. And a lot of people also aren't comfortable going into certain pubs which are wet-led and very male-dominated, and if there's a guide to go in and introduce them, talk through, that's what we're going to do, and I hope people can do that. So it is, wait for it, londonpubexplorer.com.
Nailed it.
There you go. And I hope people go and have a look. There's a lot of elements on there. There's a big piece on Back from the Dead, which is what I've always done with London Pub Explorer, going into pubs, before and after pictures, seeing the transformation, which is incredible. Just seeing somewhere that was on its knees and seeing it come back from the ashes like a phoenix is wonderful in London. It adds so much value to an area. And there's a Central Classics piece, which is kind of for American cousins who look at it and sort of say, I want to go to London where it's good. And there's the usual ones, which I'm sure you could think of, the Cheshire Cheese, the Princess Louise, that's all there. And there's also an element of pub musings, which is what we've just been talking about, but it's just my thoughts on the changing landscape, and that's whether it's different types of beers, gentrification, demolitions, sort of the isolation of certain drinkers and how we combat that. And hopefully there's something on there for everybody. But we're also doing, if you live in East London postcodes, which are E8 or E9, I wanted to kind of recapture elements of pub culture which have disappeared.
Get out my pub.
A bit like that, yeah. And you had a scenario where there's things that have gone, whether it's Snugs, which have been opened up in the 70s to make pubs bigger, London Fives dartboards, which is a game you don't see, Shove Halfpenny. There's things that have disappeared, and the biggest one, and a lot of your listeners of a certain vintage will know, the Only Fools and Horses Jolly Boys outing to Margate. And that's something that I'm creating with one of my favourite pubs, which is the Kenton Arms in Hackney. And we're running 2 Beanos to the coast the first 2 weekends of September, and there's going to be 65 hooligans, some mixed sexes, so that makes it a little bit more palatable in terms of shenanigans and poor behaviour. And we're just going to create the past, and everyone's expected to turn up, gentlemen in 3-piece suits, trilbies and flat caps, ladies posh frocks, fascinators, wedding hats, and we're going down the coast. We've got a halfway house. The coach will not blow up as it did on Only Fools and Horses. And we stop off for a few beers. The pub know we're coming. We get down the front. We go on the arcades. Southend's got the longest pleasure beach in Europe, I believe. We're going to go on the arcades, the rides. There'll be a boozer or 2 on the front. And then we come back to Hackney to the pub for a bit of a booze up. And that's something that is on offer for people who live in E8, E9. I know a lot of people will be not London-based, but that's Hackney. And anyone who lives in a neighbouring postcode to that, so that's E2, E5, E3 and E10. And it's just a case of, you go into a pub, especially in the East End, and you'll see old pictures of coaches of people going to the coast when life was really hard. That was as exciting as it got. People weren't going to Marbs and Dubai for a holiday. They had a day with a works group or a football team or a boozer going to Southend or Margate. We're going to Southend. We're going to recreate the past, and the hope is that in many years to come, when we're all long dead and the pubs are still surviving, people will go and look at the pictures of us in our Sunday best and the Hackney Gazette are coming down and say, well, who's that? Or that's my granddad, or that's my mum.
It'll be a wonderfully confused thing where the year before there were pictures of people in Southend in like tight jeans and sportswear.
Tracksuits,
Suddenly we've gone back in the past.
I've got a question for you, actually, because it was brought up twice in what you just said. You said the name of the pub, the Princess Louise, the one in Holborn, which is one of the best pub refits I have ever been in. I think it cost them like £2 million. So for all the listeners, it is a Sam Smith's pub.
Yep.
And I mean, I don't know what it was like before, but you go into it and it is just like a wooden maze. There is a lot of tiny little booths, glass, you need to crawl under them. It blew my mind the first time I went. So my question is, like, what is your opinion on Sam Smith's pubs? Because that...
My car's on fire again. Sam Smith's pubs?
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. They are the number one retainers of our heritage and our culture. And if anyone's listening, I doff my cap because it's incredible. And a lot of them you go in and they've just been touched up, but at great expense, because restoration is, as you well know, very expensive.
Yeah, I mean,
and time
the Princess
consuming.
Louise, the restoration in there, as I said,
it's amazing.
£2 million. I heard, like, the roof on the place is incredible when you look up. Just everything about it it's like going back in time.
Yeah, and the fact that you go into a Sam Smith's pub, whether you agree with their policies on mobile phones or swearing and all that kind of caper, they are traditional. There's no music, there's no football, there's no Sky Sports. You go in and you could hear a pin drop. And if you're lucky enough to go into that kind of pub 2 o'clock in the afternoon when the office workers have gone back to the office and there's a couple of tourists, it's just you and the bar staff, and you hear the clink of the glasses being cleaned, and it's just a wonderful, timeless experience. And I don't care for their beer. I make no secret of that. It's just gut rot. It's hangover juice. We used to call it Fat Man in a Box, which is the Alpine Lager. This is in Soho, probably about 2000 onwards, and it's dreadful. There goes that lucrative sponsorship contract with Sam Smith. But
I'm not sure Humphrey would have been on board with what I do. So don't worry about it.
Well, yeah, Tim Martin's got, anyway, that's another conversation. But I mean, one I would like to just champion, which I do a lot of sort of engagement with them, is a company called Remarkable Pubs, and they're based in East and North London. They got one in South London, and they're very much cut from the same cloth, where it's not about the bottom line; it's about restoring these treasures which belong to the people. They don't belong to a pubco or publicans. One day they're going to die, and someone else comes in. They belong to the people. They belong to London. Remarkable to spend so much money and time and love doing up these treasures. And there's one called the Boleyn Tavern. Anyone who's a football fan will know West Ham United's whole ground was the Boleyn ground, and they've taken a gamble because demographics of that area, most people don't drink, but like anywhere in London, it's seen gentrification. You're seeing ABC One cash on the hip demographics moving in, not just to the football grounds where they built 800 flats, but the cinema next door. The area is changing again. And this is a gym palace, which anyone doesn't know, these were pretty much places to entice, to dangle poor people in to come and spend their money. And they spent all their money on brass, on etched glass. They were opulent, and people didn't have anything like that in their normal life. They lived in hovels, yet they go into these places with gas lamps, with light, with piano, with music. And it was kind of the biggest release for working class people, and Remarkable are recreating that. And I've been in the Boleyn, I think, 5 times, capturing the changes. And this is a hulk of a building. It's incredible.
It's massive, isn't it?
It's insane, that the footprint, and they're going to have 7 separate bars. In the 70s, they ripped out all the partitions. They're putting those back, and some of them are like being in a train carriage. It's so cosy, and they've got the etched glass and the little lanterns. And if you want a snapshot in time, to go back in time, be in a little time capsule, that's the place to be. And anyone who's got any interest in history or kind of recreating the past now, go to their pubs. There's one called the Salisbury, which is in
Green Lanes,
and it's exactly like the Boleyn, and there's
the most amazing shutters.
Oh, and the ceilings, the glass atriums.
They've got these big semicircular shutters, and there's actually a pub that was done by the same architect called the Queen's in Crouch End,
which is just up the road.
And it's just incredible. Like, to look at it is incredible. These big horseshoe bars,
and I think that cost £3 million to build, the equivalent of today's money, in I think 1890 or 1899. But all their pubs are just wonderful, and you go in and it's not heavily branded. You mentioned before about EI. You go in a remarkable pub, it just feels like you're in a pub 50 years ago. It's your living room, and that's what people want.
I'll give him a big shout out as well, because Leela at the Swimmer is one of my favourite managers. So go to the Swimmer at the Grafton,
Holloway, yeah,
Holloway, and say hi to her.
Yeah, and they've got the Lord Tredegar, which is in Mile End, which is on the tours. Not to give too much away, but to not stop there would be unbelievable.
They're a great operation. We've dealt with them for a long time.
Yeah, and they just do it right.
They're independent, and they're traditional, and they're pubs. They feel like pubs. There's no sort of bravado. Everyone's welcome. Nice food, nice beer.
Very much so.
Good pricing. Like, you can get a cheap pint. It's usually Litavel for £4.
It's always Litavel.
It's always Litavel.
But yeah, I mean, you go to the Salisbury, and Barbara's the manager there. She's been there 13 years. That tells you everything you need to know. If that's a company who you want to work for, and I think Joe at the Prince George, which is in Hackney, not too far from here, he's been with the company for 10 years, and that's obviously, you know, a good place to work. You know, they have the same ethos as their staff, and you know, hopefully their footprint increases. I'm sure that the bowling wasn't cheap to put together, but you know, that's the kind of company where it will continue to grow, and people like us will support it, because no matter which pub I go into, there's still old boys at the bar drinking your Litavel for £5 or whatever it is, and they have a nice blend, which a lot of pubs, unfortunately, as we've touched on, don't now.
Let's talk about beer, Johnny. Let's talk about AVB. Let's talk about Imperial Stouts and Imber buyouts of wicked weed. Let's talk about beer. Let's talk about beer. Let's talk about beer. Let's talk about beer.
So I think that was a really enlightening chat for me. It's always good. The whole idea of this podcast is to get out of the bubble that we're living in. And genuinely, just before we started recording, I was saying I need to go back to, you know, the kind of pub with Foster's umbrellas and where Guinness is the only good choice, and just kind of reset my expectations and my definitions of what a good pub is. Because, you know, I even got to the point, I'm less bad at this now, but I got to the point where if there wasn't a good beer on, I'd just walk back out of the pub. And that's probably my loss, not the pub's, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, we're all guilty of it, and Ali and I discussed it in the episode, and quite a lot before the episode, actually, about sort of the pubs we love in London. And I mentioned there's one called the Palm Tree, and it is like the place time forgot. It's red carpets, red light bulbs. It's cash only, with everyone going the other way. They have like a Fisher Price till, and you need to walk for like 20 minutes to the nearest cash machine. It's a family-run boozer, and it's a really special place. And honestly, the age demographic in there is so vast, and you get, you know, proper old EastEnders coming in big blazers that are way too big for them, ordering pints of Foster's for £3 or whatever. And it's special, because that is what all pubs were like at a point. And it's amazing that they've changed and they can be specified to craft beer and, you know, great food and lots of other things. But I think we all need to remember what a pub is and stands for, and that's what Ali's really trying hard to promote.
Yeah, so there's this kind of narrative that pubs are really, really struggling, or there has been for the last couple of decades. And recently there's been some news pre-pandemic saying, you know, maybe it's not as bad as all that. In 2019, the number of pubs in the UK actually grew for the first time in about 20 years. But that still doesn't mean that the pub isn't struggling. Like, most of those new pubs that are opening, most of the growth is coming from gastro pubs, from chain pubs, from Wetherspoons. They're not necessarily the kind of places that offer a welcome to absolutely everybody. So while pub numbers have done okay in the last couple of years, the kind of pubs, the mix has got significantly worse, and that's only going to get worse because of the pandemic. And we kind of touched on it and touched on the reasons why pubs are closing. And it's really, really hard to overestimate how bad it is. It is awful out there, and the pandemic's only going to have made it worse. So protecting these wet-led community pubs is incredibly important. And I think I don't think there's a greater champion for pubs, like amateur champion for pubs, than Ali. And he sort of continually blew my mind with the stories he was telling. And the knowledge that he has and the experience that he has of being in those pubs that I have not frequented in a long time, and it was eye opening.
Yeah, I mean, he just really champions that community aspect of the pub, and it should be a place you can go down and not necessarily know anyone, but you can chat to someone if you're feeling low or whatever, and you don't have family around you, especially coming out of a pandemic. And he talked a lot about, well, and you mentioned it there about chains coming in. Like, I challenge all the listeners next time they're out around streets and local towns, have a look up or have a look down and look at the tiles on buildings, see if they're green or dark brown, see if there's a cellar hatch on the ground, see if there is old branding up top. In London, it tends to be Truman's or, say, Courage. You'll start to realise how many pubs used to exist, and now what they are flats or new restaurants,
Tesco's.
chains. I mean, I walked past the most beautiful pub in West London last week when I was out for a run, and it was an old brown building, brown tiles, and it was a bloody Pizza Express. I was just like, it's so depressing. This used to be and is like absolutely stunning, and now it's a sort of soulless building that pumps money into the man. So start looking around. I mean, this was a little bit of a London-centric podcast because he's the London pub explorer, but what he's saying is really applicable across the UK, especially if you live in more industrial towns, when it really was like you clock in, you clock out of your shift, you go to the boozer afterwards with your team, and that's where you sort of hung out with your friends, your family, your colleagues, and it really is that sense of community that these pubs thrived on, and it has started to fade away, maybe because of the internet, especially after COVID, and you can do everything online and so digitally that you maybe don't need those hubs, but they are important.
I mean, there's lots of amazing websites that can help you do that as well. There's a new one that they followed me on Twitter recently, and it was called like Work From Your Local, and it was saying a great way to get people back in the pub after the pandemic is for all the freelancers, and there's I think it's 1 in 8 people now work from home and are freelance. Go work in your local pub during the day, when they're not going to have a lot of trade, when they're wondering whether they should open or not. And you can drink soft drinks and coffee during the day, have a meal there, and then maybe have a pint in the evening. And you'll have done so much to support that pub, and also support the people working at that pub. Tip well, and it's the best thing we can do to support the pub happily is to drink and eat there. And there's a big movement for independence in brewing, and I think a lot of people don't think about trying to support the independent pub chains as well, because it's been well covered by me and lots of journalists about how there's been rent support for chain pubs. If you're an independent free house, unless you have a very nice landlord, you've received no rent discount at all. So all the independent pubs that you love, the ones that have great beer on, great food, do innovative things, a lot of them will have had no support over the pandemic whatsoever. So they really need us now more than ever, or else they're going to start to disappear along with the little community wet-led pubs. So yeah, I mean, it's doubled down my insistence that I'll be going to the pub as much as possible.
Definitely.
Very, very soon.
And I think for everyone out there, challenge yourself and get outside the status quo a little bit as well. Like, I know you and I are very guilty of, as you said, always just going to the pubs that we know sell good beer, but there's so much fun and character to be enjoyed when you go to these old school boozers, with the carpets, with the mushroom stools, maybe a dartboard, maybe a pool table. Like, they always have really interesting people behind the bar to chat to that have stories, and they're usually really welcoming. Although, I mean, they have maybe a stigma attached to them that like the locals stare at you, but they might do. But then I'm sure they'll chat to you as well, and it's usually a really nice experience.
Yeah, well, actually, the only time I've been to the Palm Tree, we were making a pub crawl video. We were working with Shortlist and making pub crawls through London, and we went to the Palm Tree because we were told the Guinness was great. And you walk in with your camera gear. Like, I tried to get in contact with them to say, can we come down? No response. So we just rocked up. And it's always unnerving. Like, you're going to a pub you've never been to. You're turning up with camera gear. You're very conscious that you're 3 guys with beards. And they could not have been more welcoming. And we got the whole life story of the people behind the bar. We had some of the locals come up and ask what we were filming and all this kind of stuff. It was a really, really lovely experience. And obviously we all go into our bubbles because we feel safe there. But a lot of these pubs, that's their USP, that you're going to be welcomed there. That's, it's not just about the beer or the snacks. It is literally about going in and feeling welcome. That's what they do. That's their business.
And it would be great to hear from all you guys as well if you have other suggestions. So when Johnny and I are traveling about a little bit more, if you've got ideas of where we could visit, if you've got a favourite boozer nearby in your town or city, because we'd definitely love to check more out. And speaking of which, we'll give Ali's website a plug because it has now gone live. So it's the londonpubexplorer.com. So he's got loads of info on the pubs he's visited, sort of how to save pubs, and he does his tours as well. So he's got different areas in East London, and he will show you around all these boozers. And there's also a couple of day trips. It is the Beano. I think he's got inspired by Fools and Horses. So he's doing trips down to Southend-on-Sea, and then he'll take you around some local boozers around there, and you can enjoy a good day out dressed in your Sunday best.
A proper sort of on the buses vibe. I'd love to film with Ali for the Craft Beer Channel and do some of those. Like maybe not the Beano one because that's specifically for East Londoners, but I'll definitely be going on his tours to learn a bit more about some of the pubs that I'd never even looked twice at, really, other than to go, oh, that's nice tiling. So yeah, thank you so much to Ali for coming on board and to everyone for listening. Just go to your fucking pub and don't do what I've always done, which is walk back out if there is no good beer. Like if it's going to be a good welcome, you should stay there and support it. And happily, good beer is getting more and more common in less good pubs through ties and stuff like that. I mean, fuck the tie, but also if the tie's there and there's some punk IPA or something on a guest tap, then that's for the better. Cool. So we'll be back next month with the where are we? May edition of The Bubble. And of course, join us every Friday for the Friday 5 p.m. episode with my man Brad. And yeah, there's links below to some of the stuff that we talked about in the podcast and in the intro and outro for you guys to click on and watch, including that pub crawl of the best Guinness places in London. The Bubble Podcast is brought to you by the nerds behind YouTube's Craft Beer channel. Head to youtube.com/the Craft Beer channel to watch this week's video and over 400 more exciting episodes. If you love what we do, please do subscribe and even join our Patreon at patreon.com/craftbeer channel. Love and beer.